Hi everyone, this is Alice. I am going to sort of introduce you here to the PowerPoints that we'll be using throughout this semester. The way I'll be doing this is I'll break down the PowerPoints to fit each week so that you'll have just the PowerPoints that you need per each week for the 15 weeks. And then from that, I may pull out a few PowerPoints to do this screencast sort of thing to highlight some ideas from the chapter. So you may see uh, two sets of PowerPoints for a week, and that would mean that you have some PowerPoint with screencast-o-matic here, as well as all of the PowerPoints that are featured for the week. So for instance, this week there are 21 PowerPoint slides. I'll focus in on a few of them on this screencast and talk about a few of them, but you can see all 21 at your leisure by clicking on the other link that you just go through the PowerPoints at your own speed. And that's a really great thing too, because there are embedded videos in these PowerPoints which are good to view. They're really applicable, help you learn the material in kind of a fun way. But I don't think you'll be able to run those from these screencasts. So use the screencasts to do a little bit of an audio lecture. They'll never be more than 15 minutes long. And then use the set of PowerPoints for each week to look through, scroll through at your own speed to view and study from the PowerPoints. Okay, so clearly this is Chapter 1, which covers an introduction to psychology and some research methods. This particular slide, I'll pull it all up here for you. What's really important here is that I want you to focus on the definition of psychology. And you probably have a definition. If you sit back and you think about it, you may think of what it is that you think psychology means. What does that mean to you? Is it how people behave, what they do, why they do what they do? Why is it that you're interested in this topic? Why did you take this class? These are sort of interesting questions to prompt yourself thinking about the definition of psychology. When you look at the book, they will give you their textbook definitions, and there it is in the upper right hand corner in the orange box. And a couple of important points in the definition. The first important point is the scientific study. So psychology sometimes has a reputation for being a little woo-woo, but really it's not. Psychologists are very adamant to use scientific methods. They discipline themselves to use the same sort of scientific method that the other sciences use, like physics or chemistry or whatnot, and in that they use the experimental method to attempt to show cause and effect between different variables. So we'll be going through that as part of the research component of this chapter. But it's important to note that that really psychology is based on a scientific study. It is subject to the discipline of experimental methods. So there are other ways to study psychology as well, and all the different research techniques that are used are going to be highlighted in this chapter, or many of them. The second part of the definition is that psychology is the scientific study of behavior and mental processes. And as we go through the textbook this semester, you'll see an emphasis sometimes on behavior and sometimes more on mental processes. So behavior is something that's observable, what we do, how we act. As you watch people, if you call yourself kind of a people watcher, you might see people doing things that you wonder, what is their motivation for that? And then you may wonder, what's going on in their mind right now? What are they thinking? So the actual behavior is what we do, and then the mental processes are referring to our cognition, our thinking. And so psychology studies both behavior and mental processes. All right. This is an example of a video that's a great video. It demonstrates the experimental method used in an experiment to investigate a causal effect, a cause and effect between watching violent video games and potential aggression in an individual. So this is an example, though, of a time when I'd say you pull up the other set of PowerPoints and watch this video. It's embedded into the PowerPoint. Okay, so the next key point that I want to bring up is that psychology as a science in and of itself has two major ways that it has received information or study. One is philosophers have given their efforts towards psychology, and then physiology as well. So this starts out with the influence of philosophy, and as I click these, you'll see Aristotle comes up. Over 2,000 years ago, Aristotle's wondering about memory and dreams and so on. Another important person in the history of psychology is René Descartes, a French philosopher, and he was the first to talk about what we see here listed as interactive dualism. So when we think of dual, think two. So he was thinking mind and body. What is the difference? What is the connection between what we're thinking and our physical body? And René Descartes actually he came up with the saying, "I think, therefore I am." He had quite an amazing philosophy himself, but without going into all of that, we'll say that he had a huge influence on the study of psychology. He actually thought the mind and the body communicated through the pituitary gland in the brain, which is not quite true. But he saw them as two different entities that interacted, and we still talk about this question today. So he really was one of the first, perhaps, to think about this interactive dualism, and then the conversation evolved, and we have the nature-nurture issue. And you may have heard of this in the past or before. This is probably not the first time you've thought about it. So nature would be genetics, nurture would be environment. Is it your genetics that makes up who you are and how you act and how you think? Or is it your environment that makes up who you are, what you do, what you're wondering about, how you're similar to someone else, how you're different? So there's a lot of energy that goes into this question. And we actually have a discussion question on this topic, either this week or next. And I'm wanting you to talk about and reflect on your own personal thinking about this or experiences. What have you seen? What do you experience yourself? What do you wonder about with the nature-nurture issue? And sometimes people are asked to decide, are you one way or the other? And I think I actually asked you that in the discussion question. So it may be that it's not all nature, all nurture. It's sort of a combination of both. But what I'm wondering about in the discussion is, what have you experienced? This is a fascinating question still being discussed today in psychology. And then there's the whole impact of physiology. Discovering more about the human body really influenced the study of psychology. And in your textbook, flipping through pages here, I think it starts in your textbook with Wilhelm Wundt. And we'll look at him here briefly in a moment, as a physiologist who's studying the body and wondering about the impact of our physiology on our psychology. Okay, so here's Wundt. He's really called the, oops, went too far, founder of psychology. He wanted to investigate scientifically the study of psychology. And he really pushed the limits on this. He was very scientific in how he did things. He created labs to study psychology. And a lot of it was focused on sensations. And it's sort of a subjective report of when did you hear something, when was the first time you felt that touch, that sort of thing. It was very interesting, Wilhelm Wundt. and he was the focus of the little introductory video here was structuralism and functionalism. So really this next slide introduces Edward Titchener. Titchener came from the UK, from Britain to start out. He studied with Wundt in Germany. He moved to the United States and studied a bit with William James, and then he created the school of structuralism, which is sometimes credited to Wundt, who probably did do some of it, but then Titchener moved it along more. So structuralism, they call it out here in this slide, it's involving introspection and studying basic components of the conscious experiences, what you see, what you hear, what you feel as far as a touch. So very interesting player as a founder of psychology. Let's see. So he was, sorry about flipping back and forth here a little bit, he was criticized for relying on introspection. Introspection would be a key word to understand what that is. That's the individual. Remember I said that the subjects, so to speak, in the experiment were subjectively reporting their thoughts on their conscious experience. So it's very difficult to have those subjective reports be similar. So he was criticized for that. Then we have William James and functionalism. James is one of my favorite psychologists, just an amazing insight into psychology. I hope that you read on page 5 very thoroughly about William James. I'm not going to go into him in much more detail right here. Suffice it to say, he was definitely influenced by Darwin. Darwin here also featured next to William James. These are James's students, all fascinating contributors to the study of psychology. Read about them more in the book. Oh, there's Freud, all the way to the left, Sigmund Freud. And probably he's the most well-known of all psychologists of all time. Really emphasized the role of the unconscious in studying psychology. Unconscious, how does that impact what you do? How does that impact your personality, your dreams? And he made one trip to the United States. I think this is the picture of his one trip to the United States, sitting next to Stanley Hall. I think this is at Clark University. So go through this on your own. So now I want to talk briefly about behaviorism. Behaviorism is a school of psychology that emphasizes behavior, the study of just what people do. And this was a little bit of a break from functionalism, structuralism, in looking at, instead of mental processes, they wanted to look very specifically at behavior because they thought that was quantifiable. And it started with Pavlov. We'll talk more about Pavlov. We'll also talk more about John Watson in the chapter on learning, definitely a behaviorist, as well as B.F. Skinner, all behaviorists. And they're key in the history of psychology. Humanistic psychology started maybe in the 50s or 60s, 1950s, 1960s, and that's emphasizing personal growth. This is Carl Rogers, Abraham Maslow, both key people in humanistic theory. And we'll visit them again, particularly Maslow, in the chapter on motivation. Your book then moves into contemporary psychology, and I want you to read this carefully. There are many different perspectives that psychologists take today, and you need to review these. There is a discussion assignment that's asking you to kind of choose what sort of perspective you might use, or what kind of specialty you might use. I think that's on, let's see, page 14, if you are pursuing psychology, a career in psychology. This slide, we only have a few seconds left on this. This slide is featuring cross-cultural psychology, and I will pick this up and talk a little bit more about it as we go along, but it is a very important perspective that is mentioned in your book and carried throughout your book. Let's see.